I find it rather peculiar that he met President Xi at the back of the G20 before his China review has taken place. So what we have done, what he has done rather, is kind of preempt that. I was also concerned that he seemed to be oblivious to the nature of what was going on already when Xi met Biden, who said basically he laid out 4 red lines, which included human rights, any question about what they did in mining or burning coal or any of these other things, or the nature of their government. He said these are red lines, basically, to Biden, and we're not going to brook any interference. And that included Taiwan. So he enters this conversation or discussion with a whole bunch of red lines blocking him off, even if he attempts to raise them. And then we saw what happened when he did try to raise Jimmy Lai. They cleared the journalists out of the room. They weren't going to have it. So, you know, it looked to me very much like Prime Minister, maybe because of the budget, desperate to get some kind of trade arrangement for growth. Meanwhile, the Chinese rather patronizing him and even repeating his own words back to him, saying, you know, get to the issues that he had raised during the course of the budget and further debates, which is get to the foundations, restore the foundations, I think he said back to him, which is sort of patronizing, really.
I guess, you know, you say there that this is a Prime Minister who may be desperate to get growth after the budget. And there'll be some people maybe who would argue that that's okay. You know, that is the pragmatic relationship we need with China to, you know, allow people to buy cheap toys for their children or to buy affordable cars or to protect that trading relationship. Do you have any sympathy with that?
No, none whatsoever. Because what we're actually getting when we get those cheap toys is slave labor. China is guilty of slave labor, not just in Xinjiang, persecution of Christians, huge organ harvesting and selling of organs after their executions. You know, they threaten Taiwan on a daily basis. They've taken over the South China Sea. And when the Prime Minister talked about pragmatism, he also talked about an arrangement in line with past treaties and arrangements. I think that was the phrase he used. Well, doesn't he remember what happened to the Sino-British agreement in Hong Kong? President Xi just trashed it when he didn't think it was working, didn't say anything to us, as now arresting peaceful democracy campaigners, most of all, of course, Jimmy Lai, who was the editor and owner of Apple Daily, a critic of authoritarianism. And I think this is the main bit, that the more you go desperate for trade, you also get desperate for trade at almost any price. And even as companies are beginning to turn away from China now because they get their IPs stolen, they get real problems from the bureaucracy in China, we have a government now suddenly lurching into this, as I said earlier on, before they've even completed their supposed China review, to look at whether or not China is a threat, which I believe they are, because they're supporting Russia, they're involved with Iran, they've courted North Korea to go and work with Russia, and they've been involved heavily in the Gulf as well. So I find this whole process desperate, but also rather sad, because this was a government in opposition that voted to support the idea that China was guilty of genocide in Xinjiang, but now seems to be retreating from that.
I mean, look, the human rights abuses that you kind of lay out are very compelling, you know, very, very moving as well, I should say. At the same time, there are a lot of imperfect leaders in the world. Should we be refusing to do trade with all of them? Particularly at a time when, you know, the leaders that we might want to be doing trade with might be about to kind of slap tariffs on the UK.
Well, that in a sense is the irony. The Prime Minister seemed very keen to go and war game a response to the USA on tariffs, without actually talking to the USA about opening up trade arrangements and a trade deal, our biggest trading partner, you know, a very significant one, which we actually have a trading surplus with, which is not what we have or are likely ever to have with China. All of that are possibilities, but we go rushing to China, and we know very well China's about to dump electric cars on the UK market, huge, cheap numbers of electric cars, also batteries, which will pretty much drive the UK car business out of business, as it were. And we still haven't said anything about tariffs when Europe is about to put tariffs on Chinese goods as well as America. So it does seem peculiar that we've left China out of the loop in that regard, but desperate for trade with them at the same time, despite all the abuses the sanctioning of British MPs, of which I'm one, but the human rights abuses aren't just issues. They are on a scale that is unimaginable.
I'd like to get your thoughts as well on some of the other issues at the G20 too, because obviously there's been a lot of analysis and a lot of debate about Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to use these American long-range missiles to fire into Russia. Obviously, as you would expect, that hasn't gone down well with the Kremlin, but it also hasn't gone down well with some around Donald Trump either. What's your own view? Is that a legitimate use of US weapons? Was it the right call?
Yeah, it's all very well for us to say we support Ukraine, as we have done, and it's all very well to say we want them to fight for their own freedom, but we'll supply the weapons, when we put conditions on the use of those weapons. I mean, it's like asking somebody to go into a boxing match with one hand tied behind their back, whilst the other person is completely free to do whatever they like. And that's what's been happening. Russia has been I visited Ukraine on 2 occasions up near the front, and Russia has been pounding the cities, civilian institutions, also all their power sources, for heating, electricity, etc. They've been destroying as many of those as they possibly can, free quite happily in the knowledge that Ukraine will not be allowed to use its missiles that it gets from the West to target their airfields, their supply depots, and their drone sites at the same time. This was the right decision to take. I wish Biden had taken it before, because they wouldn't be in this position now if they'd had this decision 8, 9, 10, maybe a year ago, 8, 9, 10 months ago, but nearly a year ago. It would have changed things altogether. I would now, if I was the government, be working very hard to talk to President Trump to get him to understand this is vitally important that this is done.
On that, with President Trump, he said during the campaign that he could solve the conflict in 24 hours. There's obviously a lot of concern that that effectively means making Ukraine give up parts of its territory to Russia. How concerned are you about what a Donald Trump presidency means for Ukraine?
I don't believe that Donald Trump will turn around and say, I have the plan, stick to the plan, or else we're just going to desert you. I just don't think that's going to happen. There's quite a lot of rhetoric about that. They don't want to get engaged into foreign wars, I know that, but they're not engaged in foreign wars. The idea that Ukraine can defend itself means that American boots do not have to go on the ground as they had done in Afghanistan and other places, which he was then opposed to. So the clear point to make, which I made back in December when I visited many of the Republican congressmen and women to persuade them to vote for the bill that they were blocking, and they then subsequently did, the main point I made is, if you support Ukraine with weapons and with money, you are guaranteed never to have to put American soldiers' lives at risk in that theater of war. Now, that's critical and very much important, vital information that they had to take into consideration. I think President Trump will do the same, which is maybe he'll try to get some agreement. But if it's an agreement that trades the territory they've taken over now, it's not acceptable to Ukraine, nor it should be. So we should be saying, look, if Russia, all its brutality is going to try and cling on to these territories, then we can't do a deal with it.